The Vikings are seemingly a fraudulent 11-3. The Green Bay Packers, and I know it's weird to crap on them as they're coming off the biggest comeback win in NFL history. The Green Bay Packers have a win. They're still in the playoff hunt. The Detroit
was
Lions,
against the Colts. Like it was.
Let's be honest.
Any other team up. There's not another team.
We'll talk about
literally.
it. Yeah.
I think the Texans would have finished off Minnesota. I really believe that. I mean, look at the last two. Look at the last 2 weeks for the Texans. The Cowboys had to score at the end of the game to win. They took the Chiefs to overtime. And again, we can have the discussion about why this once again proves there's no debate over who the MVP of the league is. There's no debate. But yeah, any other team except the Colts would have finished off the Vikings. Let's just be honest about it.
And you've got the Detroit Lions seemingly in the lead of the pack to get into the postseason from the division. Arif, you've spent so much time covering the Vikings and studying the Vikings. Which team concerns you more? The Vikings themselves, the Lions, or the Packers?
Well, I guess I mean, I guess the Vikings have secured, the division, right? So it's not as if the Lions can take them out of that. But, were we to try and identify the most difficult matchup for another team to go up against in the playoffs, I think would be the Lions. I'd be much more worried about going up against the Lions.
Let me paint you a picture here, because it's funny you say that. If these teams win, if the Lions win this week and the Vikings win this week, you have the Lions as the 7 seed and the Vikings as the 2 seed playing each other wild card weekend.
That's a tough one. The fact that home field advantage means even less now than it did 3-4 years ago. It would be an even more difficult matchup for the Vikings to take on, even though they've got home field advantage. No, I think the Lions are a fantastic team. They're taking advantage of the fact that they've got all kinds of talent. They've got talent up front, offensively and defensively. They just added essentially Jameson Williams to the receiving core, which is now looking more and more impressive. I mean, Amon-Ra St. Brown has a Pro Bowl case ahead of him. So there's a lot going on with the Lions. I'm still not a believer in Jared Goff, but the rest of that team is doing such an excellent job that, it's kind of bringing that forward. And Jared Goff is the kind of quarterback, that can be carried. I mean, there's some quarterbacks that are average to below average that can't be carried, right? Like say Jameis Winston, right? He's just going to make a mistake and you're just going to, lose the game because of that. Jared Goff is not that kind of quarterback. He's not going to make the plays himself that are going to help you win the games. But if the rest of the team kind of pulls you forward, he's probably not going to lose you the game. Probably.
It's like a Jimmy G.
Yeah, no, exactly. I would say he's kind of like a poor man's Jimmy G, right? Because Garoppolo is probably the best at being a caretaker quarterback. But Goff, in the right circumstances with the right offense, and Ben Johnson's coordinating a great offense for him. I think that is kind of the example that where you'd want to maybe invest a little bit less at quarterback in order to get kind of the rest of that team, healthy and ready. So, yeah, I think the Lions are certainly the most dangerous team. It was a really difficult game for the Vikings to take them on, a couple of weeks ago. And I think that would be the most difficult game they've got up ahead of them, which makes sense, it's the playoffs, but it would be the most difficult game they've got up ahead of them for the rest of the schedule. It's going to be kind of difficult to get a good read on who the Vikings are as they finish out the schedule, in part because the other team that we're talking about, the Packers, I don't think the world of, if I'm being honest.
No, there's no reason for you to think that way. The Vikings, they finally got their defense down below 400 yards a game, giving up by playing the Indianapolis Colts. I mean,
good job, guys.
Yeah, I mean, and I know defense sort of takes a back seat these days, although it's been a resurgence in defense this year. Scoring is way down than over the last couple of years. But to me, that Vikings defense has to be concerning for anybody who's feeling.
It's a huge liability. It's a huge liability. Yeah. And I'll say this, you keep on mentioning that the comeback was against the Colts. I think that, having the greatest, comeback of all time also means playing against the greatest choke job of all time, right? That's correct. Those are two sides of the same coin. And I think that it makes sense to kind of view the Colts as a team that is, capable of that, right? I would say that this game is not the best example of why the Vikings are necessarily fraudulent. I think the way that they gave up those 33 points in the first half, a lot of that is just kind of fluky behavior type stuff.
Correct.
That's 100%. Did you see? I put that in our
special teams issues. Yes, absolutely. Two scooping scores that were negated by horrible.
Exactly right. Another a 40 or 51-yard punt return taken away by a phantom penalty as well. I mean, there was a lot there where the Vikings, you quote unquote should have been, a little bit more comfortable, a little bit more ahead of the Colts. But you take a look at the games before that one, And I think you've got a pretty good case, right? You know, the Vikings have like what they're 10-0, 11-0 in one score. I've lost track, but they're undefeated in one score games. And in these close games, a lot of it
the
is
Houston Oilers, by the way, for the record. There's 78 Houston Oilers, 10 straight. Yeah. Or not 10 straight, but 10 one-score wins. Yeah.
Did they win the Super Bowl that year?
They did not.
Huh, interesting. Okay.
Well, we talked on the show. If you look at point differential, the Lions are 3 points better, +5 in point differential than the Minnesota Vikings at +2.
Yeah, and you take a look at the kinds of statistics that help you project performance going forward. Nothing's good. Football's weird, but the better ones include stuff like point differential that are a little bit better than something like win-loss record, right? It is really difficult to tell how good a team is based off of essentially a sample of 14, 15 games. We've only got one data point to extract from those games. You've got more data points, which is the number of scores in a game, that helps you out a little bit more. If you take a look at some other metrics that have more data points, things like yards per play or points per drive or things like that, which are a little bit even more predictive, right, than point of. I mean, the Lions are better than the Vikings in those measures as well, right? And it's difficult to get a good understanding of how the Vikings are winning, but it is easy to understand that this isn't likely to continue. Right. And, you know, it's tough because, you know, I say this on my podcast, Norse Code, right? I say this on my podcast. I say this on, you know, and other appearances. I write it down. And, you know, a lot of the people that follow me are Vikings fans because that's where I come from. And they get like really upset and angry that I talk about these things.
They are so mad at you.
They're so mad. And I get it, right? Like, oh, we're winning. Why can't we enjoy it? And it's like, look, I'm not telling you can't enjoy it. Enjoy it, man. Have a beer. Like, have fun with you. I don't care, right? My job is
to manage your expectations.
Yeah,
just manage your expectations.
Yeah. So, you know, these are great wins. They're fantastic to watch. It's exciting football. The Vikings are one of the most exciting teams in the NFL to watch right now. But that doesn't mean that they're necessarily one of the best teams. And it is difficult to trust a quarterback that's not having his most efficient season. In fact, I think it's his least efficient season. And is in a lot of these close games against teams that they should absolutely be blowing out. They should have blown out the Washington Commanders. They won 20-17, right? You know,
the Bears earlier this year, they were up big on the Bears, and it came down to a great play by Dantzler late to sort of.
Absolutely. You know, against the Saints. I mean, we talked about this before. Against the Saints, you know, they forced a fumble on a punt return because Chris Boyd was former teammates with Amir Smith-Marset when Amir Smith-Marset was with the Vikings, and he knows how he's going to carry the ball, right? Yeah. Like he said after the game, like, yeah, I knew how he was carrying the ball. You know, we knew how to force fumbles against him. And it's like, oh, well, I'm sure that'll happen again. Right. Like, I don't know. Like, you know, a lot of these are instances where it's just like they had an amazing special teams play that's unlikely to repeat itself, like a muffed punt that they recover. On the flip side of that, Jalen Reagor has muffed punts and has fumbled punts and has never lost the ball. The Vikings have always recovered that. How long is that going to continue? Right.
Correct.
And so it is difficult to like kind of trust the Vikings are their record, but I also don't have any difficulty believing that they're kind of a good team too, right? Like that's not really the question. The question is are they as good as 11-win teams? And I think the answer is no.
Trey, I have a question, but real quick, Arif, to your point, the Minnesota Vikings and for my betting model, one of the metrics I use is points scored per minute of possession time, right? Mm-hmm. And the Vikings are number 2 in the league after their comeback win against the Colts this week, actually supplanting the Detroit Lions, who were number 2 behind Dallas. But on defense, Minnesota gives up the 5th most points per minute of opponent possession time. And so, you know, and Detroit is number 2 in the league on defense as well. So goes to say that the Vikings are closer to a 7-7 team than they are 11-4 in that regard. But Trey, we talked about the Packers a lot tonight, and I want to just bring them into the mix here. What is it about the Packers that doesn't have us talking about them the way we're talking about the Vikings and the Lions? What are they missing? Even though win-loss wise, they're right behind the Lions and not so far away from that record. What don't they have? What are we not seeing from them?
Well, I mean, Aaron Rodgers sort of alluded to it. Still not complete trust in the receiving core. Right. That's let's start there. Their defense hasn't been as good as a lot of people thought it was going to be this year. Aaron hasn't been as good. Like I know it's easy to pin it on the receivers, and Christian Watson is coming on and playing great. Aaron hasn't played well. Like he hasn't played well, you know, and some of that is the injuries and some of that is the brand new receiving core. They just, I mean, I get it, right? Like right now they're 1 game behind, but before the 2-game winning streak, they were 4-8. And you know, the Lions were 6-7 and 5-7. And it just, to me, it just doesn't feel like the same Packers from the last 2 years where Aaron Rodgers was the MVP, and that they'll figure it out. I think this is still very much a work in progress.